Joined now by former Vancouver Canucks analyst, member of the coaching staff as well, now Hockey News contributor. Good to catch up with Rachel Doerrie. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you guys?
Yeah, very well. How things going? Yeah. And you were on a live blog at the Hockey News this morning, Rachel. Is that right?
I was. Yeah, I was doing a live stream. You can't swear. You got to be put together. Things are hitting you on the live line. It's like throwing back and forth. It was my first real experience with that. It was fun.
And, of course, no big deals were happening either, which made it's generally easier than that, Rachel. You generally get something a little pithier to chew on than what we saw this morning. All in all, though, Blake and I were talking, what a magnificent deadline, huh? Like all the trades.
The week, not the day.
Yeah, not the day, but the week. Heck, even going back to the Bo Horvat trade, just a lot of really interesting trades to chew on, huh?
Yeah, we thought because of the way the cap is right now, with it being flat and now with different TV deals falling through, it might continue to be that way. We thought it was going to be a boring deadline, and it was quite the opposite of that. You look at the names that move. You have Horvat, Timo Meier. These are big names that in a traditional sense may not have been moved. Given I'm sure the Canucks did not want to be in a spot where they had to move Bo Horvat. I don't think that was the plan entering training camp, but entertaining nonetheless. We saw a bunch of big deals that I don't think we necessarily saw coming. And so I'm here for that. I would love that.
So when you were last with the Canucks, it was training camp. They were aspirational. They thought they had a playoff team. The goal stated was to make the playoffs. What do you imagine the mood, the atmosphere, the approach was to a trade deadline season where it was clear from the jump, you're not in this and you're a seller, not a buyer? How do you think that would have been received at large at Canucks Sports Entertainment and in the hockey ops department?
Not the same way that it was received within the fan base. I think that those two chasms of people are on different pages. It was playoffs or bust. Bruce said it. Jim said it. Patrick said it. And that was the case. The Canucks absolutely thought that they had a playoff team. And obviously a lot of that hinged on Thatcher Demko. I never think it's a good idea to just be completely reliant on your goalie, but based on the season he had last year, that was something that we were willing to take a chance on. And so when you sputter out of the gate the way that you do, I think it's kind of a kick in the teeth, because you're sitting here telling your fan base, who is begging you to rebuild and to do it properly, to just not cheat the system. They're begging you for years to do it. And you tell them we're going to make the playoffs, and then you are not even close to being competitive. I think that's a kick in the teeth. And there was definitely some hard conversations that had to have been had in that front office, because not only did you not make the playoffs, you completely missed the mark on a lot of things. And so I think that there were mistakes that were highlighted. There were mistakes made this summer that were highlighted. And I think that probably makes everybody in the Canucks front office rightfully feel uneasy.
Which brings us to the Hronek trade, because we know that you overpay for right shot defensemen. So I think we're pretty unanimous that, if the team is in the right position, paying that price to get Hronek as a final piece to your puzzle, maybe you can convince yourself of that. How much did it surprise you, though, that this team in this situation went and paid that price right now?
So I got a text probably 20 minutes before the deal was announced, being like, have you heard this? And in my head, I was like, there is no way this is happening, because the Canucks had made, in the Bo Horvat deal, even though I think they could have gotten more, that was a futures deal. I thought that was good, right? Then you have other deals where they're getting draft picks back. I'm like, okay, so they've realized maybe that they need to do that full rebuild, right? And of course, it's been mixed messaging. And then I see that, and I'm like, what? Because I look at it, and in a vacuum, Blake, you're absolutely right. If you're in a good spot, that is a deal you make, right? But when Jacob Chychrun goes for only a little bit more, I don't think any of the three of us sitting here today are going to say Filip Hronek is a better defenseman than Jacob Chychrun. Jacob Chychrun has a long track record. And I don't think anybody would have been disappointed if the Canucks got Jacob Chikrin. That's a legitimately good defenseman that you maybe want to lock up. He's cost controlled. He could be re-signed, whatever the case may be. But when you're giving up those assets and then to not put conditions to protect yourself on that Islanders pick, to me is unacceptable. To not have that foresight. To just say, if the pick goes to next year, we have the right to a pick swap. So you get, similar to what the Islanders did this year with Tarasenko, the Blues are getting the lower of the Dallas or the New York picks. For the Canucks not to do that, to say you're getting the lower of the Canucks or Islanders pick in the event the Islanders pick confers to next year, that is unacceptable to me, because you are now looking at a situation where if the Islanders take a step back, that might be a top 5 pick. And if you've traded a top 5 pick for Filip Hronek, you have made a mistake. Like, that's what it is. And the other thing you have is he's an RFA and you're going to have to re-sign him. So now you're in a situation where all of the good players that you want to be part of your core are being paid either their market value or above market value. You don't have any efficient contracts, and you look at teams who have won the cup. Colorado had so many efficient contracts, and they still do. Tampa has so many efficient contracts. You need those contracts.
Austin,
and
3
Canucks,
years.
You just don't have those. And that is, to me, that's a problem. You've also got Alan Walsh, who is an agent notorious for saying, I'm getting my players the most money. So good luck with that. I don't know what to say.
And it doesn't also have to be a blanket rule. I'm okay with the Canucks making a deal like this in parallel to deals that bring in picks. So if they did the Hronek trade and then the next day traded JT Miller or Garland or Besser for picks, that I can sort of see again. Okay, Hronek's for tomorrow, picks are for 2 days from now, that sort of thing. That would make some sense. But without that trade to balance, it's an exodus of picks, and you're back down to net zero, as we've talked about. But they had some high-end picks. They had 3 in the top 40. We have a lot of crestfallen listeners who are like, I was actually looking forward to draft day again, and all of the moving and shaking for the Vancouver Canucks over the course of that 2 days. Now, you got 1 pick in the first, 2.5 rounds. It doesn't feel like Christmas anymore.
No, and I agree with you. If you make that Hronek deal, because I think in a vacuum, that was a good deal. Like, that's a really good player. He has taken a step this year, but I do think that it should be concerning to anybody when Steve Yzerman says we need to move on from this player.
Yeah.
Like, to me, that's concerning. And so I look at that and go, did Steve Yzerman identify that maybe this isn't sustainable? And that would be concerning to me. But nevertheless, Filip Hronek is a good defenseman. And so the asset you're getting is good. But like you said, then you have to move a Besser or a Miller. And speaking of Miller, if you have an opportunity to move off of that contract, regardless of whether you're getting a center or whatever, that you move off the contract, because the prize in the deal is not what you're getting back. The prize in the deal is the cap space. And cap space is an asset in today's game. And so to me, I look at that and I go, if it's true, and I have no reason to believe that it's not, that's an error, because you make the Hronek deal, and that's okay. If you turn around and you deal a Garland or a Besser or a Miller, your fan base then at least you feel a sense of direction, because you're like, okay, they're not moving to a complete rebuild, but now we've moved the timeline to 23 years old as opposed to we have to win right now, right? And so to me, I just think that there was one move that was made that was good, but if you look and you see the forest for the trees, it's not the right decision.
How surprised were you when they signed Miller?
My jaw hit the floor. I was, that deal was announced on Labor Day. I had found out that we were signing him earlier than that. I didn't know what the parameters were. And I was shocked. I was stunned, to say like the very least. And that's not like he had a 99-point season, right? But to me, I looked at that and I said, this is a mistake. Never mind the player. He's a good hockey player. Like, let's not make any mistake about it. This doesn't align with our timeline or what the timeline should be. And so to me, I'm like, this contract is not going to be worth it. It was more than what I thought he should be paid. And I thought that the priority should have been Horvat. And if you look, would you rather have Horvat's contract or Miller's contract right now? I think you'd rather have neither. But, I mean, I was, Matt, like, shocked, stunned, couldn't believe it.
When do you... There was a school of thought, Rachel, and we might have been totally out to lunch on it, but that they would use this year, and I mean, Jim certainly, his comments early on in his tenure had overtones of they would use this year to sort of get the cap straight, hopefully bring in some younger players or at least start the work on defense, and then be, able to all systems go for 23-24. Well, when and why do you think that changed to let's sign JT Miller and be a playoff team this year?
That changed this time last year. When Miller wasn't dealt at the deadline last year, when Boeser wasn't dealt at the deadline last year, that's when I really felt that it changed. Because I thought you had an opportunity there to really set yourself up. But, I mean, winning those couple of games, you guys know what that does in the Vancouver market to the man who cuts the checks. So I think that was kind of when it changed for me. I thought that there would be some leeway in the summer. It turns out that when you hand out contracts that have no trade and no move clauses, those are hard to move. Shocker. I just wouldn't hand them out unless it's a superstar player. Like, if you're not a top 6 forward or a top 2 defenseman, you're not getting one. Sucks. Too bad. Right? And so to me, I thought there would be a little bit more flexibility, but because those clauses existed, there was really no way to get flexibility. And then you go out and you sign some of those deals that maybe you shouldn't have. But once you decided you weren't moving Miller and you weren't moving Boeser, like, in that line of thinking, okay, then the Mikheyev signing makes sense.
Yeah.
And the Lazar signing makes sense. Now he's been traded. But, like, to me, the decision was made last year at this time when Miller and Boeser were not moved.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this question. It's our Bodog poll question. One of them here today. If it's an either or proposition, and we heard they were trying to move both of them today, who you keeping? Boeser or Garland?
Oh, Boeser. I'm keeping Boeser. I think he, you see, kind of playoff wise, teams aren't as interested in smaller players in the playoffs. I think Boeser has a better chance of being full value for his contract than Garland does for his. I think they're both good hockey players, but I just think that Boeser is an underrated two-way forward, in my opinion.
Can you rehabilitate the relationship, Rachel, between Boeser and the team?
That's a tough one. Mm-hmm. That's a tough one.
We've seen it. It does happen.
It does happen.
Yeah.
Boeser loves Vancouver. He loves the city. He loves the fan base. That is someone that's actually become attached to, like, the fan base in Vancouver. And he is, like, he's a guy in your dressing room that, like, obviously he's been through a lot in the past year, and, like, I wouldn't wish that on anybody. But, like, when he's in, like, that positive kind of mood, like, he impacts the dressing room because he's a great guy to be around. And so for me, I think that even if you're not getting Boeser at a scoring pace, you're still getting him at two-way. And, like, he hasn't dropped off that much. I think a lot has been made about Boeser. I actually expected a much more significant drop-off. I think he's been better than I personally would have expected this year, knowing what had happened to him. So I would keep Boeser because I think he has a better chance of kind of rehabilitating his play. And then do I think you can rehabilitate the relationship? Not necessarily, but at least rehabilitate his play so that when you do trade him, you get actual assets for him.
Well, considering the tone, we've actually made mention of this already today. His stats are actually sneaky okay. Not sneaky good, but they're sneaky okay. And that, the rhetoric, the talk is way more negative than his stats actually are.
Yeah, like, you think this guy has 25 points.
Yes.
Yeah, no,
right.
Sure.
And when you think about it in the grand scheme of things, if you look at everybody on the Vancouver Canucks who has not performed up to expectations this year, I think there are two players who have performed above expectations this year. 40 and 43. End of list. End of list. But if you look at players who have been acceptable Brock fits in that category. He hasn't been horrendous. And I just think he's taking a ton of flack, and I don't necessarily agree with it. And so I think you rehabilitate him and then you look to move him. Do I think he's a little bit overpaid? Yes. But at the same time, goal scorers, like if you score 30, you're worth something in this league.
If I can make an amendment to your 2-player list, and if this is Robert's rules, hopefully it's a friendly one. I'd put Kuzmenko on the list as well.
Yes.
Unless you thought, Rachel, that he was going to be a 35-goal guy plus, or even a 40-goal guy coming into the year.
Okay. So Kuzmenko, I wouldn't even count him because, like, he was a guy where, like, coming into the season, we didn't know what he was. So there weren't even expectations. So it's like you can't exceed expectations if you didn't have any. Now, you're absolutely right, Matt. He's been their third best player the entire year. I don't think that contract makes sense for what Vancouver is right now. I think you very easily could have traded him for a mountain of assets.
Yes.
He would have been one of the most valuable pieces at this deadline, given his contract and his scoring, and you could have just re-signed him in the summer.
Right.
Like, you could have done that. But yes, I absolutely agree with you. He has exceeded expectations, even though the bar was, like, on the floor.
Lastly, I wanted to ask you about, one reclamation project and one of the younger players who counts as a prospect for Vancouver. Do you have any kind of hopes for Vitaly Kravtsov or Aatu Räty here with the new organization?
I have been a Kravtsov fan for quite a while. Like, we're talking prior to me being employed in Vancouver. I've liked Kravtsov. So I actually think the Kravtsov bet is a good bet for the Canucks. He's a Milstein client. Like, are they going to go get Grigory Denisenko as well? They're just cornering the market on, like, Milstein clients. I like that bet for them because worst comes to worst, you've given up like a 7th round pick, which has a less than 1% chance of hitting. William Lockwood, whose ceiling isn't anywhere near Vitaly Kravtsov. And so if you actually, like, the season's lost. So play him in the top 6, see what you've got. He had a shift last night.
Yeah, it was really good.
Incredible. And if that's what you see in him, then yeah, I really like that deal. I think that's like a free shot, right? Aatu Räty, to me, he went a lot lower than I thought he was going to go in the draft. I still think he's a winger. I do have some concerns about his game. And so I think that on a winning team, he's a winger. Might he be a center for the Canucks? Yes, he might. But I mean, I think all of us sitting here today, like, would probably fall on the floor in shock if the Canucks won the cup next year. Like,
yeah.
I think that's a fair statement to make. And so I do have hope that I think both are NHL players, Matt. Like, I do think they got 2 NHL players there. But the argument that the Canucks are better with Kravtsov, Räty, and Hronek than they are with Horvat is just not, that's not an argument you can make. And so for me, I look at that and I go, you would be better with the return you would have got for Miller last year, the return you would have got for Besser last year, and the return you would have got for Horvat this year than you are right now with the decisions that you made. Having said that, the process of going after Kravtsov is good for me. Like, I think that speaks to positive process.
Absolutely.
We've got to find positives, right?
Right. And no, you're quite right. I mean, I think people stood up and applaud the Kravtsov deal, much like getting a 4th rounder for Curtis Lazar.
TSN needed to find
today,
the positives.
Much like getting the prospect Bloom for Stillman. So
TSN needed to find the positives. They brought in Bruce Boudreau, as you well know.
Yes,
that's one way to bring in the positives. Yeah.
What did you make your old boy Bruce there on TV tier? Were you able to see any of that?
Yeah, I saw a lot of it. I don't have a bad word. I never will have a bad word to say about Bruce. That guy, even on my hardest days with the Canucks, that guy made me want to come to work. Like, even when I was going through that week that has now been laid out publicly, like, he still made it an enjoyable thing to come to work to. And so, like, the Bruce There It Is skit, I thought was so funny.
So good.
The swearing one, which is the play on what happened in Washington, which I think is funny because, like, I don't think I heard him swear once while I worked with him. That's just not in his nature. He's just this happy-go-lucky guy. I love Bruce. Like, the guy, you could say what you want, but the second fastest coach to 600 wins. His players love him. To me, like, anywhere that guy goes, that's a positive move for that organization. And so whether it's TV or I think he'll be on a bench somewhere someday. He's a positive add to wherever he is.
Marvelous stuff, Rachel. Thank you for the time here today. We'll follow along in the hockey news. Appreciate this.
Thanks, guys.